Hey everyone, this video lecture is here to help kind of give you an idea of what rhetoric is and how that can be used in our class. So in general, rhetoric is something that was traditionally for the wealthy. It goes back as far as 2,000 plus years ago with Aristotle, and people who could afford to have tutors to teach them how to use rhetoric in their communication and formally argue and discuss things. They were the ones who had access to this education and knowledge of like what it was. Eventually this group called the Sophists come around and they say like, no, anybody should have access to education, specifically rhetoric, which we'll go into in a minute. And they've argued for this to happen. And while some didn't agree with that because they were like, well, if everyone can access this, rhetoric's going to be abused and it's not going to maintain its pure purpose. The good news is that like this office went out and everyone's starting to be able to have access to the education, which is good because, now we in 2023 or whatever year you're watching this have access to know what is rhetoric and how can you improve it to help you go further with what you want to do as you want it. So what is rhetoric? That's a great question. It has a lot of mixed results when you talk to people today. Some people think rhetoric is only for extreme academics, like people who are just like really high thinkers and up there and like really philosophical. Some people look at rhetoric as something you would use to trick people. Some think rhetoric is just being excessively wordy and over the top with your communication. But at the end of the day, rhetoric is actually a lot more simple than that. It's just about language and how we communicate. So rhetoric is the use of effective language to modify the perspective of others. And you may be looking at that and be thinking like, I don't really know that I want to modify someone else's perspective. Like that sounds sketchy. We're not really being sketchy. Like if you want someone to agree that this is the restaurant we're going to go to, or that you deserve a raise, or that you should be hired for the job, you have to modify that other's perspective of you to match what you want, right? You're not doing it to be sneaky. You're doing it to attain a good goal. It's just about effective language, so effective communication. But not all effective communication is the same. So when we study rhetoric and we think about our rhetoric as communicators, we have to remember that it's not one size fit all and that it is much more than just words. So like I could talk to you with just words, no tone, no body language, and you wouldn't get the full picture. But as soon as I add in a tone to my voice, I add some body language, my facial expressions start going, you get a fuller picture. So when we think about rhetoric, we do have to think about more than just the words you're using. And I'm going to show you the 5 things that we want to consider in a moment, but just know it is bigger picture than just your words and what you're saying. However, the good news is if you feel like you're not a good communicator, that this isn't good for me, like I'm just horrible at this, rhetoric can improve. It is a teachable subject. I mean, Aristotle was teaching it and it's been taught from thousands of years ago through today, and it will keep going to be taught. So don't give up on yourself. You can do this. So what I like to show before we go into the actual 5 elements is this rhetorical triangle. Communication is kind of like a triangle, and if you're missing one part, it will fall apart. So you have the communicator, which can be considered ethos, and that's all about your credibility. Do you have the authority to speak on this? How do you look? How do you sound? Just as important to that is the message, which can be considered logos. So that's information you're giving. What's your argument organization? Do you have reasons? Do you have evidence? What's the structure? How's it written? And so that's kind of on you to create as the communicator. The other part of the triangle that is very important that you just don't have as much control over is the audience. What are their beliefs? What are their values? What's their experience? What's the context of this conversation? So just remember that communication is like a triangle, and if you remove one part of it, it becomes lopsided. So we do want to think about all 3 areas of our communication anytime we're doing some form of formal communication. So the 5 rhetorical situations, or the 5 elements of rhetoric, are the first is text. So that is the written text. That's your words. I say written. It could be language, but it's your words. It's the tools you use to make that text or how we decipher the text. Okay, so it can be your advanced language. It can be the sentence structure itself, but that's like the words. Then there's the author. This is a reflection of you as the communicator. Can we interpret you as credible? Can we believe your perspective? And just remember that the audience viewing you is going to have their own perspective of you. So if you're going into a potentially hostile situation in that, like, you have to give a speech to a group of people who are already not sure they agree with you, you as an author would consider, okay, how are they going to interpret me and how can I help that? So the words, the author, and your credibility. Next comes the audience. You want to think about what's their background, what's their knowledge, what do I need to teach, how can I successfully appeal to them? So if you're going in to talk about raising the pay for teachers, but you're going into the accounting group, you may not play on their emotions as much because they're going to be more cut and dry. Here's the numbers. So you'd want to go more logical approach. But if you're going to say a group of teachers and a group of parents, you wanted to get them to support the idea of raising pay for teachers, then yeah, you might play on their emotions of like, remember when this person did that for little Johnny, or when they helped Tyreek with this, and those kind of ideas. You adjust to fit the appropriate audience. The fourth situation is purpose. So what is the purpose of this? What's your purpose as the author? And what's the audience's purpose for listening? Your tone fits into this category typically. So remember, how you sound is just as important as what you say. And then the last one is the setting. And this often gets overlooked, but it's the time, place, and context of the speech. So again, just being aware of the surroundings and the situation you're in and adjusting your communication for that. Really great example of how you pull these 5 together is if you're telling a story to a friend versus a parent. So with your friend, you might be more casual. You can use different types of language. They already know maybe your friend, so you don't have to give them as much background context. And if the purpose is just for entertainment, like, it's easy to do and it's more casual. But if you're telling that same story to your parent, maybe you don't use the cuss words. Maybe you have to explain who these people are and how they connect. And maybe you're not as loose with it, even though you're still trying to entertain them. So those are the 5 traditional elements of rhetoric. Oops. However, there's some modern parts of persuasion that, even though they're named the same, they've switched. So we're going to keep our elements named text, author, audience, purpose, and setting. Outside of those elements you need to consider, you have ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is all about the credibility of an argument. How do you establish your virtue and expertise? So obviously this ties in really well to the author part of rhetoric. But it is important to remember that you need to show your credibility when you're making an argument. So not just in any communication, but specific to arguments, be credible. Then you've got logos. This is the logical side of your argument. So what analogies are you using? Your examples? Do you have citations of research? Do you use statistics? Do you use experts? Just watch out for fake news. And what I mean by that is make sure your source that you're going to use in an argument, especially a scholarly argument, is a legitimate source. Because if you accidentally use a source that looks legit but it's not, and then someone finds out that it's not, well, you've just lost all credibility. And logos is about building your credibility as an author through the logical side of your argument. And then the last one is pathos. This is the appeal to emotion. It is very effective, however, it becomes easily chaotic. You can't control someone's emotions once you let go, right? So you can put an appeal to emotion in, but once you do it, you don't really have control of how it affects people. So you may intend for it to lift people up, but maybe it does something else as well. So that's like the idea of riots. Maybe you're just there to give an impassioned speech and we're going to change the world, but you weren't a little too emotional, and now people are so spun up that they're rioting, and it just spins out of your control, kind of like the Tasmanian devil, right? He's just going crazy and whoa, and off he goes. Hopefully you know that cartoon character. But these are just the 3 elements of argument that build on your rhetorical situations. And we're going to look at all of this through the semester. This is just to give you an idea of what is rhetoric and how can we improve our communication by focusing on our 5 elements and then our 3 persuasive techniques.